No one has given explanations concerning the purpose of life and creation and the framework and fabric of the spiritual universe like Meherabad. No, these were an integral part of his, we call life's mission. This was not the most important aspect of his work. The most important part of his work was working on the higher spiritual planes to effect the great spiritual upheaval that he declared would happen in this age. Many of these explanations that he gave were sometimes incidental just to assuage the curiosity of people who were around him. Even probably the greatest publication during his lifetime, God Speaks, Baba used the expression about it, throwing the dog of a mind a bone to chew on. But, yes, and Erich would tell us that to help us, understand what the real important things were. I guess he felt called. The Baba explained that the soul from the beginning of creation goes through this process of evolution of consciousness through the experience of 500 million forms to gradually become fully conscious, to be born as a human being who is now in a predicament. Although full consciousness has been achieved, there's this dross of impressions that have accumulated, sanskaras that have accumulated during the process that compel us to be convinced that we are our bodies. Even the best attempts through the intellectual medium of science has come to the false conclusion that consciousness is a byproduct of a biochemical reaction in the brain. It's a natural assumption. The four of the physical senses are exclusively located around the brain, but in fact, of course, Baba says it's just the opposite of that. So the paradigm is kind of upside down in the physical world, and this makes the soul be caught in a cycle of reincarnation, endless births, as Buddha called the endless wheel of births and deaths, oscillation between the opposites. I am male, I am female, I am good, I am bad, right, wrong, black, white, everything. This goes on. These are innumerable false answers to the original, real first question, who am I? And the false answers compel the soul to continue the process, caught endlessly in the process of ignorance. This goes on, Baba says, for millions upon millions of lifetimes until the individual gets fed up with ultimately the rank materialistic self-interest of the world. Then this is an interesting thing that Baba said, which is in the supplement of God Speaks, about the spiritual paradox. Unless and until ignorance is removed and knowledge is gained, the knowledge whereby the divine life is experienced and lived, that is, everything pertaining to the spiritual seems paradoxical. God, whom we do not see, we say is real, and the world which we do see, we say is unreal. In experience, what exists for us does not really exist, and what does not exist for us really exists. So now faced with this dilemma, Baba says there are two experiences in the gross world. There is ignorance, and there is intellectual conviction, which is the most the person experiencing ordinary consciousness can have. But Baba says that's not a small thing. Real intellectual conviction never diminishes, and it's the rock that allows each person to hold on to the real goal in all of life's currents. Baba would sometimes explain this thing, the three types of conviction. So he said, you begin with intellectual conviction, because as he said, all faith is really based on intellect. It is that the mind must release an allowance for, we say, the heart. It's not really a heart, as Bob explained so beautifully. It's not heart, it's really the higher mind. The higher mind, which is the seat of most sublime feeling, and not just critical reason. So intellectual conviction is not just intellectual understanding, it is the stepping towards a balancing of the heart and mind. I love that couplet of Hafiz, which roughly translated is like this. The mind can never sit on the throne in the palace of the heart. It can only be the guard at the door. The other types of conviction Baba mentioned, then what happens with intellectual conviction is as the soul progresses spiritually in the planes, then that intellectual conviction through the experiences of intuition and inspiration gradually becomes deeper, and eventually the soul gains mental consciousness. And the only sense experienced in the mental world is sight. And that sight is the presence of God, and then the actuality of God, the realism of God everywhere and in everything. So that, Baba says, is conviction by sight. But the real conviction, he says, happens through experience, the experience of realizing that I am that one and only that one exists. There is no other I. But as far as the soul struggling through the process, this goes on for millions of lifetimes, he says. He used this term, bumbling through millions of human reincarnations. Finally, the soul gets fed up, which is the first thing required. You must be fed up of the world, the false world. So he says eventually then the soul begins an effort to poke into the maze that leads out of the illusion of manyness towards the reality of oneness. Call that the spiritual path. Even then, it's not quick. There are many distractions along the way of a religious fear and promises by charlatans of quick realization of the goal through some exclusive technique. The most insidious distractions are self-deception and, most dangerously, delusion by someone who has achieved some occult charisma, but has no real authority based upon subjective spiritual experience. And Baba says, for those, that addiction is more insidious than any drug could ever be. And he said in this age, there would be many, on many different levels and many different faiths. But eventually another thing starts happening as time goes by. By the way, all of these bad experiences we've all most definitely had in our past, but there's something then that happens, and that is deep within the psyche, the sense of discernment gets developed, where we know when the time comes to something that this is not it, that is not it, and you Stay on the focus to the truth. And it's important, it's crucial. So the whole thing with spirituality is about readiness. What happens is we are associated with different souls through the processes of mostly, let's say, human reincarnation, all through from the beginning, but mostly, let's say, through human reincarnation. Some of those people we are associated with eventually become advanced. And some of them, a few of them, will become realized, perfect. And through connections with them, each one of us gradually makes steps forward. And many are connected to the only Son of God who has the eternal responsibility for the whole creation. So at first, indirectly through other persons who have connections before us, and then eventually through our own subjective experience of connection, we come closer and closer. Even you'll see in the example of Baba's own life, he contacted hundreds of thousands of people, mostly for a second or two. Usually he would give them something in prasad to eat. There was a tangible physical medium from his touching and giving prasad, and those persons consuming that. Maybe it was a beginning. Maybe it was a further connection. But it's an integral part of the avatar's work whenever he comes, to continue contacting people. So he comes at different time intervals to be born as a man in different places, and invariably the same type of thing happens. He comes, his message is, God is one. We are all one. Love God. Love each other. And he lives his life. People are, at first only a few people are attracted, and gradually people are inspired by the undeniable truth of his life. And more people come to follow him, centuries go by, and eventually the followers of the great master find it socially, politically expedient to construct an external form of structure around the master's teachings. It's a more tangible way to approach him in reality, in our reality. It makes the intellectual mind more comfortable. And eventually what happens is, and Baba says it's inevitable, it happens, it is, he says, humanity's attempt to put God in a cage. So they construct this organized religion, the original living message of love and truth of the master becomes perverted into an organized religion of rites, rituals, and ceremonies that then asserts we have the exclusive access to God. Not that Baba didn't leave us with some form. We have the Duni of Meherabad, we have the universal prayer, prayer of repentance, a few little things like that. But these are things that Baba gave us directly, and because they are from the source of truth, we don't regard these, and nobody has to say anything. People who feel they want to do it, do it. But because Baba integrated these things into his work in this Advent, he declared that they have great spiritual charge and will greatly benefit anyone who takes part in them for centuries to come. He, at one point, explained that even prayer is almost like a compromise. God is not prayer, and it's nothing, but it's the first step, an expression. So he says prayers given are almost like a compromise from God. But we have to assume that this is, and he says, no prayer is forever. But we have to assume, as he said, this is the best, this is what you get in this Advent. The last line of the universal prayer is, you are named Izad, which is an ancient, Izad, the only one worthy of worship. Izad is an ancient name of God, which means the first soul, the essential one first soul. Baba referred to himself as the Ancient One. And the most comprehensive explanation I've ever come across for that is from the book Beams on the Spiritual Panorama, the essay Avatar as First Master.
In the infinite beyond state of God, which transcends the categories of consciousness as well as unconsciousness, there appeared the first initial urge for God to know himself. And with the arising of this initial urge, there was an instantaneous manifestation of infinite consciousness as well as infinite unconsciousness, as simultaneous resultants. Of these two seemingly opposite but complementary aspects, the infinite consciousness plays the role of the avatar or divine incarnation. The infinite unconsciousness finds its expression through an evolution which seeks to develop full consciousness through time processes. In the human form, the full consciousness strives to have self-knowledge and self-realization. The first man to realize God as one indivisible and eternal truth was taken up into this realization by the eternal avataric infinite consciousness.
Could you read that sentence again, please?
Mm-hmm. The first man to realize God as one indivisible and eternal truth was taken up into this realization by the eternal avataric infinite consciousness.
Wonderful phrase, huh?
The avatar is the first master of the first God-realized soul. But in God-realization, the full consciousness of the first master became fused with the eternally infinite consciousness of the avatar. Therefore, with the coming down of the first God-realized man, the avatar himself descended and took an incarnation in his body. So, from the point of view of incarnation, the avatar is the same as the first master. This first master masters in the human form to help them in truth realization.
We're missing a line in there somehow in this print. But this first master required no master in human form. Okay.
This first master required no master in human form to help them in truth realization. The first master who got fused with the eternal avataric infinite consciousness is the master of all masters. Yet, if and when the avatar takes an incarnation in the human form, he brings upon himself a veil, and this veil has to be removed by some master or masters. The veil with which the avatar descends in the human form is placed upon him by the 5 perfect masters, who bring him down from his formless being. In the avataric periods, the 5 masters always put this veil upon the infinite consciousness of the avatar, because if he were to be brought without such a veil into the world of forms, the existing balance between reality and illusion would be profoundly disturbed.
Fascinating. Can you repeat that line, please?
In the avataric periods, the 5 masters always put this veil upon the infinite consciousness of the avatar, because if he were to be brought without such a veil into the world of forms, the existing balance between reality and illusion would be profoundly disturbed. However, when the 5 masters think that the moment is ripe, they remove this veil which they have placed on the avataric consciousness. From that moment, the avatar consciously starts his role as the avatar. Every time the avatar descends, he is not necessarily recognized as the avatar by the masses. he can be recognized as such only by those who are very advanced spiritually. The avatar himself is the least concerned about whether or not he comes to be recognized as avatar by large numbers. He plays thoroughly his role as the avatar, and his chief work lies in the higher invisible spheres of existence. If, however, he appears at a critical or transitional cyclic period, as is often the case, he is hailed by the masses as the avatar of the age. The avatar is not necessarily recognized and hailed as the avatar by each and all, because he covers himself under a veil for his own spiritual work. This veil, under which he prefers to remain hidden, is different from the veil that the 5 perfect masters draw on him while bringing him down in the human form. The veil that the avatar puts on himself can be removed by him at any time, and for any person or persons as he may desire, for the purposes of self-revelation or self-communication. The avatar does not take upon himself the karma of the world, nor does he become bound by it, but he takes upon himself the suffering of the world, which is the result of its karma. His suffering for the world is vicarious. It does not entail entanglement with the karma of the world, but humanity finds its redemption from its karma through his vicarious sufferings. For example, his illness, humiliation, accident, and the like. In his own way, the avatar unfailingly fulfills his incarnation by giving a spiritual push to his age.
Yeah, there's a line missing there that should have read, the first master did not require a physical other master to get realization because he was fused with the eternal avataric infinite consciousness. But all subsequent perfect masters require another perfect master to give them realization. This book, Beams, was written as a result of questions that arose after God Speaks was first published. And it begins with a very nice essay on how, and when you answer one question, Baba says, in the realm of spirituality, a dozen more come up, and this could be an endless process of answering questions. But nonetheless, a dozen essays in this book are really wonderful. In God Speaks, Baba explained that before the avatar could be born on earth, the 5 perfect masters had to be here first. So on the face of it, it seems that these two explanations are in conflict. But what Baba is referring to in God Speaks is the avatar being born on this earth, not the first earth. The contemplation of the beginningless beginning is really something that is beyond ordinary intellectual ability, but we're talking about now what he's referring to as planetary spiritual evolution. And before the avatar could first be born on this earth, the 5 perfect masters had to be here first. It's a great example of why context in this thing, context is important to sort these things out so that we don't degenerate into a religion of literalism that has lost the connection. But now let's just consider the physical universe, since it is the field upon which the whole game of creation is played. Now, this subtle and mental, we don't know, they're vastly greater than the gross universe, but we're just talking about the reflections because the framework of creation, as Baba says, is always the same. The designs are innumerable. So look at the size of the physical universe. The consensus of astrophysicists today is that here's the thing. These numbers are so astronomical that it's ridiculous to say a number because they become so abstract that It's inconceivable. So I like the simile. Astrophysicists say generally that there are more stars in the universe than there are grains of sand on the planet Earth. Some of these stars have solar systems, and some of those solar systems have planets in varying degrees of development and contain souls in the process of evolution. And Baba has stated that 18,000 of these planets have fully developed consciousness, have souls that have fully developed consciousness. That means human beings live on 18,000 of these planets. Okay, going back to the sand simile, if you take 18,000 grains of sand, I'm sure that can fit in your hand, or maybe two hands. But compare that to all the sand in the world, and then you can see that, mathematically speaking, the distances between these planets that are inhabited by human beings, by odds, also have to be astronomical. And Baba says they are astronomical, except that they're not so far after all, because human souls reincarnate from planet to planet. And that's how inner links are developed for human beings around the universe. It's amazing. And then Baba makes the statement, which to me is the most statistically incredible thing, where he said that our planet, Earth, is the only planet in the universe where a balance of the heart and mind can be achieved, where the spiritual hierarchy headed by the five perfect masters dwell, along with the musts and the other spiritually advanced persons, where there is the possibility of achieving the goal. One grain of sand, one speck off of one grain of sand, off of all the sand. So I tell people, my first reaction was, I bet you say that to all the planets. But it's one of those things that we take Baba's word for it. Well, scientists believe that the universe is 13, 14 billion or so years old. But Baba has stated that this whole thing has been going on for trillions upon trillions of years. Again, this contemplation of the beginningless beginning is just mind-boggling. The fact is that science, through science, will only ever be able to look as far back as the recreation after the most recent Mahapralaya. You know, Mahapralaya is that event, Baba explained, it's common in Vedanta, where the whole universe gets reabsorbed into an infinitely finite point. And Baba put it very beautifully. For a timeless, eternal moment, only to be re-expressed in creation again. And it's not that, there's been some confusion about this issue in the past, it's not that everything gets reabsorbed and then starts from square one again. This is how fine consciousness is. All of the consciousness of each individual soul recedes into a latent seed form in the universal mind, unexpressed in creation. So after Mahapralaya, when creation re-expresses itself, gradually, as suitable life forms are available, all of those levels of consciousness, the souls in different degrees of consciousness assume those available life forms according to their developed consciousness, and eventually human beings also then come back. I mean, we could have, the average human being now has gone through all of those as Baba said, 500 million different forms. And if you're looking at any kind of even the freakish forms that Baba has described and many of those were found in fossilized form on Earth, most likely we didn't experience that on this planet. It would have been ages ago. And here's the issue with the upside down paradigm. That is science thinking that this is reality and that all that other stuff is kind of theoretical. You may have your religion, it's all theoretical. Well, if the paradigm is upside down, the physical world is very plastic. So I always go back to Baba's statement in the final declaration, where he throws out this comment just about illusion when he's explaining illusion. The framework is always the same, but the designs are innumerable. And one of the questions that was asked, that was repeated in beams, is that what happens if a life form becomes extinct due to humanity's unnatural activity? And Baba says not to worry, because what drives life forms is the demand for a conscious, suitable vehicle, a biomechanical vehicle that is suitable to experience that development of consciousness. It's not vice versa. So the thing to always remember is that consciousness drives the body. The body does not determine consciousness.
Okay, so after Mahapralaya and the universe comes into being again,
Yes.
we don't have to start as gas and then rock.
No, nothing like that.
We come back as human
Yes,
beings.
it's just the weight. But since you've already spent an eternity in the timeless eternal moment, which because there's no time, who cares? I just, it's just amazing to me. A brilliant mind like Stephen Hawking was asked to can you definitively, we need this question solved. Is there a God? And so after, I don't know how many days, months he took to determine this, he said, there cannot be a God because before creation there was no time. So therefore there's no God. Well, he kind of missed the point. Who gave him a definition of God? He missed it. It happens. The limitations, the upside down paradigm. Well, this planet is basically considered to be 4 billion years, more or less. Early in the life of this planet, there was a collision between another planet and Earth, which resulted in many millions of years of reorganizing the particles, and that's how we have now this Earth reorganized the majority of that gravity mass into a planet, and the moon was the leftovers of the collided planet. I just mentioned that because in 1952, when Phyllis Frederick was on the Senate with Baba, she had the opportunity to be there before others with Baba and the women. And they were having a lovely moonlight evening in the guest house compound, and she was looking up at the full moon. And Baba did something like this. She said, Baba, I feel like I've been there before. And Baba said, yes, the moon was once an Earth. Yeah. It's just showing us, these connections between bodies, and the recycling of matter. It's just molecules. It's not the thing. It's just molecules. The urge to know is what's driving all of this stuff. The urge to know. Basically, life started on Earth. Some of you will know this more than I, 700, 800 million years ago, any significant life forms on Earth, and gradually the different life forms went through these eons of different things that, according to science, contributed to the mass fossil fuel storage of the planet. You remember Irene Coney Bear? She was an author who was thinking about these kind of peculiar things. And so Baba gave her a little latitude to ask questions. In 1953, during Baba's birthday time, she was at Meherabad and had the opportunity to ask Baba a question when other people weren't around. She asked Baba, when was Adam? When was the first man on earth? His purpose in life was not to be the answer man, but he humored her. But in answering her question, apparently, he caused again so many more questions. But this is the fascinating answer Baba gave. He responded, if I answered that the first man came on this earth 84 million years ago, what would that mean to you? But the whole explanation will make you understand how the first man evolved and how this first evolved man has been repeatedly, millions of times, appearing not only on this earth, but on millions of earths, and so he is ageless and timeless. But this all has to be explained properly. The book that I have personally written when I had just stopped speaking and which I wrote in 1 year and which now lies in the bank to be touched only when I order, explains this point clearly. It is important for the world and the scientists to know, and therefore I have explained about cycles, the position of the earth for realization, the earth dying and the simultaneous evolution of another earth, not any other planet. When was the first human being evolved? When was the first realized being? Whether the chicken or the egg came first? All has been written in detail in that book. Again, the book, okay. Well, this is 1953. Later in that year, 1953, when Baba was in Dehradun, he made the comment, there have been many earths before this, and there will be many earths after this earth, when this earth is exhausted. He said, even now, another earth is being prepared for when this earth is exhausted. He said, it is three quarters ready now. Only another quarter has to be prepared. But God knows how long that takes. But all of these things are fascinating, of course. Again, the whole point of this is to help us consider the magnitude, the great eternity that he works in. When Debbie and I were living in the trust compound, sometimes at lunchtime I would go and sit with Erich when everybody else was gone, just chit-chat with him or talk about different things. One day, I brought up the fact I had been reading a book called Edgar Cayce's Story of Jesus, which is really a nice kind of a compilation of his readings about the Avatar and the different advents and different things around that. He explained an interesting point. Someone had asked him about the time, the lifespans of those characters in the Bible. Were those real? Or is this something just exaggerated in legend? And Edgar Cayce said, actually, the lifespans were much longer then, although not all the... Of course, what's not accurate about Bible history is the timeline and the actual ages. We know that the creation is not 6,000 years old. But Edgar Cayce explained that, yes, those lifespans were much longer, but in this modern age, where the speed of life has increased, it was spiritually expedient for the lifespans to shorten so that the experience of life, birth, and death could be quickened to help spiritual development. So that's what reason he gave for that shortening of the lifespan. So it made me think about the math again. So I'm sitting with Erich and saying, yeah, so, I said, Erich, according to Baba's explanation, the natural course of human reincarnation till the end is 8,400,000 lifetimes, give or take 10,000. Yeah. I said, suppose any individual soul could get an average, a cycle from birth to death to birth again in 120 years, times this 8.4 million lifetimes. I said, that would be about 1 billion years. And still, I said, there are all these delays. There's suicide delays. There are delays because you don't have suitable connection to people who could be parents and family. And sometimes, as Baba said, there are ages when the soul just is not suitable for them to take birth. They may lay back tens of thousands of years if it's not right. And they don't have the opportunity. But say, even if they could get that birth in a cycle of 120 years, our time, I said, that would take 1 billion years. Eris just chuckled and said, say at least 2 billion. The point being that obviously those persons who we see, not any of us either, could possibly go through the whole complete human experience on one planet. So this long process of human reincarnation, planetary spiritual evolution, is all connected. It's all connected. It continues to be. There has to be connection. Creation has to be interconnected. In this known history, Baba would refer to the known avatars, and use them in his work sometimes. That is, for an example, in the new life, he asked money to write the names down of the known avatars. So that started with Zoroaster. When we would go to India in the old days, I know myself, asked them in Mandali Hall, when did Zoroaster live? And they Mani and Erich, who were there, would say, Baba said 10,000 years ago. 10,000 years ago. After Zoroaster, there was Ram. But Baba hinted during the 3 Incredible Weeks that Ram lived 7,000 years ago. So now there's a gap of 3,000 years, and according to Baba's time given for avataric cycles, there had to be at least 2 between Zoroaster and Ram that we don't know. We're assuming Krishna came immediately after Ram, but we don't know that. Then there's a big gap between Krishna and Buddha. There had to be several more there. Suddenly, from Buddha to Jesus to Muhammad, those 3 advents are closely connected in time, which is anomalous. And some people have trouble with that. They don't fit the cycles. But what I say, personally, my conjecture is that these 3 had to be closely connected so that the followers from these belief systems, these religions, could interact with each other in culture and create the atmosphere, the environment for this final, very important advent in a cycle of cycles, as Baba said. Once in the early days, 30s, maybe early 40s, at Meherabad, Baba told the women on the hill that he was the last avatar in a cycle of 24. Now, this is before he was talking cycle of cycles. He said he was the last avatar in a cycle of 24. Mathematically, as Baba had said, the average is a little over 1,000 years, so 24 avatars adds up to 25,000 years plus, which is interesting to me because it closely matches the time for a very ancient calendar system, which is the precessional equinox cycle, which is 25,700 some years. That is, on measuring from, let's say, the equinox, which was the ancient system, it's the day and the night are balanced. The Earth faces a position in the galaxy, and it takes 25,700 some years for the Earth to rotate 360 degrees to return to that point. In other words, in a little less than 72 years, the earth moves 1 degree. It's also interesting because Baba's explanation is that the term of Indra is the head of the angelic realm, who is a fourth planar who takes that term, which is about 25,000 years, Baba said. It's just fascinating because, again, this is part of how the framework is always the same, how divinity manifests uniformly in many ways in creation. Baba had explained that every time the avatar comes, we use the word perfect mistake, but Erich would prefer the term perfect weakness. But I use both of them because a weakness implies that there was a general repeated pattern, and mistake implies a single event, which usually, sometimes, according to Baba, was the explanation. So, for an example, he said Buddha's perfect mistake was that he didn't explain that there was God realization, that is nirvikalpa samadhi. He only explained up to nirvana, which is the absolute dissolution of illusion, the absolute vacuum that happens immediately before the experience of the I am God state. Baba said there was actually a reason for this, is because when Buddha was in India at the time, there was an excessive focus on deism. This God, that God, and to bring it back to the purpose, which is, he said, the perfect of all masters is to free their followers, their disciples, from falsehood. So Buddha focused on the path to truth. And if anyone got to nirvana, then the game is over. The effect of this is interesting, though. Now we have Buddhist atheists. They kind of missed the point. But as Baba says, it's nobody's fault. This is the effect. Maybe this is how the avatar comes back again and again after he has his perfect weakness. It creates an effect. In Christianity, Baba said Jesus' perfect weakness, his error was that he, on the cross, said, Father, why have you forsaken me? When he had already said, I and the Father are one. That can't possibly happen. But when you see the result in the theology of Christianity, it's really this thing of oneness with God, and unity is a very esoteric thing that only the highest advanced saints in Christianity would talk about and reveal. He said the perfect mistake of Muhammad was that he couldn't tell those people that he was actually God. They couldn't accept it. So he told them that the angel Gabriel was whispering things to him. So he is the messenger of God instead of actually God in human form. But going back then to the importance of this Advent, once in the hall, somebody asked Erich, Erich, Baba said, this is the end of a cycle of cycles. This is his last Advent in a cycle of cycles. And his manifestation would be the greatest because of, can you tell us a little bit about this end of the cycle of cycles? And Erich, who was really not interested in these kind of subjects and was tired of answering these kind of questions, after some years, he just said, well, every time he comes, he says something like that. And everybody laughed just like this, but I thought, why did Baba give so much importance to this then? And how could we possibly know? Baba put great stress on it. So what, he's just playing us along, or what's happening here? Is there any way we can tell? Baba did say sometimes the divine plan gets expressed in creation, and we can see a reflection of that. I started thinking, how can we possibly know that? But then I started considering, why is this time important? If we look at natural history, suddenly things are happening in the 19th century, especially by the end of the 19th century, that Actually, there is definite change. Not just because warfare has suddenly developed after, let's say, the Crimean War and the American Civil War, then weapons started to begin to really develop. Even a simple thing like the indoor toilet was a great contribution to extended lifespans and the reduction of illness, indoor plumbing. I look at the year 1894, then I thought, this is a curious thing. The principle of the electric motor had been developed theoretically in the 19th century, and they had done a few prototypical projects with generation of electrical energy and consumption to move like a local train system here and there, but nothing big. But in 1894, the production of the electric motor really began. And because of that, the elevator was invented that year. Motion pictures were invented in 1894. Many interesting things were invented around that time, including a simple thing like the zipper, which is a very simple device which has saved God. How could you calculate the time it has saved humanity? It's true. But what happens then is human beings who are used to being just involved in these tedious tasks, suddenly they're happening more quickly and efficiently, and their minds are changing. The direction of the thinking is starting to change. At first, it's leisure and play, but then eventually there's deeper thought happening. They can start reading philosophers and different things. Things are happening now. The most significant, probably, invention regarding Meherabad's advent in 1894, not invention, but finally it really began, was the production of the automobile in Indiana. Very symbolic for this advent, which also then had to do with the consumption of what's considered the stored energy of the planet in the form of hydrocarbon-driven vehicles and other things. Even the name is like a spiritual metaphor for the internal combustion engine. It's also contributed to now mass pollution of the planet. When Paul Brunton interviewed Baba at the cave at Meherabad in 1930, Baba just frankly told him, you see all this advancement in mass communication, mass transportation, in all these very efficient ways of living physically in the world. He says it's all due to the fact that it is time for the Christ to manifest on earth. It is all making the possibility more viable for me to give my message to humanity. Baba's life itself, we can't really even begin to get into that on the subject. We've focused on those things through the years many times. His keeping silences, it was obvious to me that he had to keep silence in this advent of noise. It was the only solution. But all the work, all the different phases of work, all integrated in seclusions, the burden of suffering, on it went. Baba said at one time, do your best or do nothing at all. The population will increase. Yeah. And he mentioned that all these so many souls from other planets would now be taking birth on Earth because they were being given the opportunity to have a birth on Earth during the time of the Advent. That doesn't mean they're aware. Totally unaware. It has nothing to do with... The thing to remember is our subjective awareness plays very little part in the game. We're like toddlers being led. We just go. Where Daddy brings us, we just go there. All of these millions and upon millions of souls from other planets who take the opportunity to have a birth, They're given the opportunity to have a birth on Earth during this Advent. This is the reason why the population had to grow. There's another important aspect to that, and that is that the intensification of interaction happens. And when you add that with this element of mass transportation, mass communication, what the result is that these ancient karmic connections and patterns from ages are suddenly rapidly being resolved. Even if any one of us, let's say on a subtle level, we look at the news, we see people starving and suffering in Yemen and Syria, and we think, poor people suffering, what can we do about it? At least this is happening and we can feel empathy. It's more than humanity has experienced in the past. Bob would say in later years of Guru Prasad especially, now, he said, now I will make the world very close. Isn't it amazing that Meher Baba, for so many years, used an alphabet board to communicate, and now there's so many people on Earth have their own little alphabet board they're communicating with?
That's right.
The archetypal perfect human being, and this is the result of it. And he even mentioned it himself, he said, soon everybody will have their own phone and just put it in their pocket. Oh, people would say, how could that be? That must be centuries away. No. Communicate, he said, in 1 second you communicate with anybody around the world. All of this is to resolve those ancient karmic patterns, connections that happen, that take so many ages to develop, now are being quickened, resolved quickly. It's quite an amazing thing. Going back to this explanation about cycles, Baba gave the final declaration at Meherabad on September 30th, 1954. There were about 1,000 men present who had been invited. This is only one paragraph of, to me, a very beautiful message that is often overlooked. My next advent, after I drop this body, will be after 700 years. And that will mark the end and the beginning of a cycle of cycles. All cycles of time and illusion end and begin after 700 to 1400 years. There have been and will be millions and billions of such cycles in a cycle of cycles. Yes.
What's that last line?
There have been, he's talking about avataric cycles now, there have been and will be millions and billions of such cycles in a cycle of cycles. Thus, there is no end to illusion, which always remains illusion. Baba once said that a big cycle was about 12 billion years or so.
Did you say B with a B?
B, 12 billion years or so, a cycle of cycles, something like that. Going back to the explanation that everything is only spiritually advancing for the most part on this planet, in the true sense. So all the people who take birth here, whether they realize it or not, are extremely fortunate. How long does it take to get that opportunity? And then how about a handful of us who are obsessed with keeping company with the Ancient One? It is like how Baba often reminded the people who were around him, the handful of people, he would say, you all have no idea how fortunate you are. There's an interesting correlation and connection between every Advent. Bob explained it like this. In every Advent, the avatar is the writer, producer, and director of the next Advent. He is also the main actor in the production that was written, produced, and directed by the previous avatar. And so this connection that the avatar has with his cycles goes on and on like that. So he is the eternally responsible only Son of God for creation. It goes on like that. In the interim, the 5 perfect masters of each perfect age, and Baba explained that there are 11 perfect ages between avataric advents, they execute the divine plan. And the divine plan has within it the manifestation of the avatar's advent, which is usually after that period of grace, as Bob explained, that happens immediately after he drops his body. So the significance of the avatar's advent every time, the most significant date is that date when he drops his body. That's why Amar Tithi is so big to us, because that's when his work gets released. After the final declaration in 1954, the following years, Baba put great stress on what seemed to be this enigmatic subject. My humiliation, the breaking of my silence, my glorification, and my manifestation. That would happen in that order. At the same time, he explained that the avatar does his work, all of his work, while he is in his physical form. And when he drops his physical form, that work is released. And that new cycle really begins then. That is, the execution of the divine plan begins from the work he has accomplished. So it is the great milestone. What is this thing, manifestation? What do we really care about? Manifestation, what does that mean? Well, Baba said it's important for the world to know him personally, to reap the benefit of his presence. Otherwise, if it were just us, we'd say, we're fine as it is, thank you. Yet we're kind of in this conflict, because Baba said, now is the time to tell the world I am God in human form, yet we like it just fine like it is. On the end of July, Baba said, my work is completed 100% to my satisfaction. Yet he continued his strenuous seclusion work, hammering his fist. As his body, his health became worse and worse, and eventually dropped his body 6 months later. So Baba explained it to them like this. He says, I am like a commander on a battlefield, mortally wounded. I know that death is inevitable, but as I'm stumbling to my death, I see some ants on the ground before me. And out of compassion for the ants, I struggle a few more steps before I fall. Ants? What are these ants? So Erich explained, these ants are truth-loving humanity. People who didn't necessarily have some spiritual connection with some advanced persons, maybe not even the avatar, nothing like that, but within them, they had a yearning for truth and out of compassion for them, this extra bit. The result in his work will be an extension of this period between the time he drops his body and the actual manifestation, which he says will happen after a period of great world conflagration, great suffering.
Which is happening now.
It's only beginning, according to what Baba has described. And he said, I won't break my silence of my own accord, I will be forced to. And that event happened a few days before Baba dropped his body, according to Erich. He won't say that much, but okay. According to Baba's statements, it's clear to me why Baba has said all the work he has done was accomplished in his physical lifetime. And that last thing of breaking his silence, it was not a clearing of his throat. He really made the sound. The sound, as he indicated, that was there. Francis was also there in the room.
Was it like an ohm?
It wasn't ohm, it was a very loud Baba didn't say ohm, he said it's the sound that he would be forced to make. It happened. We're just saying, he's the archetypal perfect human being with eternal responsibility for creation. And according to his explanations, we're just putting these things together. The Mandali never talked much about these subjects, by the way. They had us focus on his divine humanity, because the real thing is about love. But I don't profess to get into that. This is not a meeting of poetry, it's a meeting of fascinating things. But the purpose of all of this is to help us put this together and have a big picture, because ultimately what it all means is that we have a way of remembering him that is really relevant, really relevant.
I have a question.
Yes.
So, if the Mandali were saying to you and other people that Baba made that sound,
Mm-hmm.
does that equate with his breaking his silence?
It does, except here's the issue. We want to assess all of this according to the upside-down paradigm, where our time and space is real. So where's what's happening? Must be all just a lie. It is his compassion, as he said, that the effect of that would not be instant. So I refer to this period now as a period of compassionate preparation. To qualify that explanation, I say, the issue is this. These things cannot be assessed in our upside-down paradigm. This is illusion. To apply plastic time and space to reality, you're going to miss the point. It is this period of compassionate preparation that is helping individuals gradually to make a connection. And all of us know, first of all, it's not about saving our asses. It's about finding that essential truth. That's what his work is, freeing us from falseness. No one can come to Meher Baba through persuasion, coercion. There's nothing to convert to. There must be an individual subjective experience of inspiration. That is his work. It's not ours. I tell people it's like this, you know. The intellectual mind is like a ball and chain that the heart has to drag around. And if all of these things can make that ball and chain a little lighter and easier to drag around, then fine. That will help us. This manifestation happens usually in the second, third perfect age after the avatar drops his body. As Bob explained, those first 2 cycles, perfect ages, the perfect masters stay hidden because it's the time of the avatar, but it's an important thing that happens immediately. You'll see the pattern repeats itself. After the avatar drops his body, there's a period of catharsis, suffering that happens, often to the followers of the avatar. That process is how they get cleaned, by becoming, in the worst case, martyrs for the cause. That's how they get cleaned. Baba himself said the greatness of Islam was not in the Kaaba, it was in Karbala, where the family of Muhammad died as martyrs, because in that process they were cleaned. But after that happens, then suddenly there's a flowering of the faith. It's a catharsis that you can see it in the recorded histories. And Bob himself would talk about the time after he dropped his body that would be a time of great suffering before he broke his silence. And what we're talking about is the effect of the breaking of his silence, because it's all about sanskaras. There has to be a tremendous breakdown of sanskaras in order. The truth is always there, but the truth is silent behind the noise, the noise of illusion. And until the falseness is deconstructed or diminishes to a certain extent, that can't be heard. It's impossible. So as Baba said, the world I must speak my word to the world must feel it. Feel. It has to be felt. That means it's not a convincing through literature. There's no book per se that is going to convince people like that.
So everything we're saying, like the sped upness of life.
It will, and it must happen. All of this intensification is crucial to create the environment that will lead to the final catastrophic destruction of falseness. To the level. Now Baba would use the term more than once, that 3/4 of the world will be destroyed. And although he explained it down a little bit in 1954 after this, he also told him that everything he said was true. He's God, and everything he said was true. Don't think that he was just... Those 4 messages given from 54 through 55 are all interrelated. That's a whole nother subject we could easily spend an hour on, so we won't get into that. Only to say that he did say it would happen. It will happen. Things are, on all fronts, things are becoming tenuous on all fronts. It will reach a peak, and Baba had said that only when things reach a point of absolute deadlock in the world, and the whole world cries out, enough, will I be forced to break my silence. So that process is going on. But now, the final point I want to bring up today is because the relevance of his circle, every time the avatar comes, he has a circle. And it's actually 10 circles of 12, plus the 2 appendages, who are closely related to the first circle. The first circle, Baba said, must get realization within that period. And he said that period of grace lasts 100 years if he comes back in a short cycle, or 200 years, like in the case of Muhammad, when he would come back in a long cycle. It's about that. It's irrelevant to the span between cycles, because that span between avataric cycles makes up the 11 perfect ages. And it's done according to the perfect ages. So the first perfect age after Baba, we can say, is done. Mathematically speaking, it should be done, and we should be in the middle of the second perfect age. But within another 50 years, according to Baba's explanation, all of those first circle members must be realized. So we know Mehera's not coming back. Gustaji went. He was the one that Baba mentioned in the 20s that would get realization before he himself dropped his body. Gustaji died in 57. Baba said he's finished, got realization. Mehera won't be coming back, but he said Mani and Erich would come back one more time. Sava Kotwal said Padri and Pendu would come back as perfect masters, to be perfect masters. So these are the people. They must come back within another 50 years and take their duty as assigned to them in the divine plan to execute that duty. And I always thought, who would be more suitable to execute the manifestation of the avatar of this age than his circle people? And it just makes perfect sense. It most likely is like that every time.
Will they look the same?
They will appear the same, Baba had said, not in God Speaks, but it's another explanation he gave. They will appear the same as when they first entered the circle, but we don't know what that was and how they looked. We don't, Baba didn't reveal all of that stuff. This is something, every time the avatar comes, part of his work is to prepare future circles. And the people of the 10 circles must be out of the game by the next advent. Must be totally out of the game. Out of the game means realization. And I'll just make a conjecture here. Let's say, Baba said Baba Jan in her previous life was Rabia of Basra, who was six-plane saint. But she lived centuries before. It's possible that Rabia of Basra was was a member of one of the succeeding circles of the avatar. And her final role as perfect master was to unveil the next avatar. It's possible. Just explaining this as a hypothetical so that we can kind of get an idea of how this is an ongoing connection. It's all an ongoing connection. And it is all the game of the one, ancient one. That's it. I have enough time for today. Thank you for coming. Any questions?
Yeah, I have a question.
All his answers we never got to. I forgot what the question was.
So these people from other planets, although there is no need to take birth on other planets after they have achieved a birth on Earth, that doesn't mean they won't. How about all the other souls they're connected to? How do they get helped? And Baba used this term, inner links. Beautiful term, inner links. We're all connected. My work will go on by the inner links you all have. Inner links. It's how his work through the circle happens. They're links to succeeding circles and people everywhere. From there it spreads out into the whole universe. So the universe has to stay, it's not compartmentalized per se, it is connected, very connected. Final declaration, I'll see if I can just remember that particular paragraph. Unity in diversity, this is a really good subject for today too. Unity in diversity can be made to be felt only by touching the very core of the heart. This is the work for which I have come. I have come to sow the seed of love in your hearts, so that in spite of the superficial diversity which your lives in illusion must experience and endure, the feeling of oneness through love will be brought about amongst all sects, religions, faiths in the world. Something like that, paraphrasing. Beautiful.
Perfect our political climate because we'll know that this is happening.
It's great, Katha.
When Trump's heart is open.
All of these people are just, no, not necessarily. His job is to be a catalyst for catharsis. And all of these people, as Bob explained, are just puppets in the hands of the perfect masters. That's all they are. It takes millions of births to line up a Donald Trump, somebody like that, a Hitler, Baba had said. These people who take roles, they have to be perfectly prepared for these things. It has nothing to do with our apparent moral judgment, because in the end, they play a specific role in the divine plan, which is much broader than can be assessed by morality. So we don't know. We don't know. Pardon? Yes. Yes. Remember again, the universal message. All this world chaos and confusion was inevitable.
Can I say it?
Yes, go ahead.
All right. Okay. That's one. All this world confusion and chaos was inevitable, and no one is to blame. What had to happen has happened. When what has to happen will happen. There was and is no way out except my coming in your midst. I came because I had to come. I am the Ancient One.
good way to end. Bruce, you had a question?
Yeah, I was just going to ask you quickly say this one more time. So you said that all 10 of the
Circles.
circles
First circle.
have to be realized out of the game by the time of the next advent.
Advent.
Right.
It is what's triggering the manifestation. The ramifications of the first circle's realization go rapidly through the universe. All the succeeding circles and all the spiritual hierarchy and all of that. It happens very, spiritually speaking, it happens very rapidly then. When Mani was there with us, and she would often say, Baba said, I have one more lifetime as a man. We would say, oh, isn't that sweet? Not thinking, First of all, if you're Mani Esarani, what's going to be better than that? And considering we never thought 84 lakhs lifetimes and all of that, in those days, it was just, they were so natural and human. And once, when Mani came into the office, was standing by Debbie's desk, and again she repeated this thing. Hey, Baba said I had to live one more lifetime as a man, and Erich has to come back as a woman. Yeah, so that's it.
But
Amazing.
Eric said he wanted to come back.
Yes.
Why? Tell him.
So,
Yeah, tell us why.
well, this is what Erich said once, sitting in the office with him. He said, anyhow, I have to come back one more time as a woman. I said, Erich, why would you want to do that? Yeah. He had said other funny things, in the past, like his dry wit. He would say, people would say, the Mandali, how fortunate they are, adventures with Baba and all that, but really speaking, we were only the servants of the women. So Erich had this comment, anyhow, I have to come back one more time as a woman. I said, Erich, why would you want to do such a thing? He says, I want to know what it feels like to love him.